Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named Wayward Pines Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a Secret Service agent named Ethan, who woke up from a coma and found himself lying in a pine forest. He had a bruised face, but his clothes were intact. He walked aimlessly through the forest and arrived at a peaceful town. Passers-by looked at him curiously. Ethan walked into a restaurant and asked the waitress where he was. She replied that he was in Wayward Pines, Idaho. Ethan wanted to say more, but he collapsed due to exhaustion. When he woke up again, Ethan found himself lying in a hospital bed in Wayward Pines. A kind nurse stood in front of him and explained that he had a minor concussion and broken ribs from a car accident. Ethan remembered that he and his partner were on their way to investigate the disappearance of 2 agents when they collided with a truck. He asked the nurse about his partner who was in the car with him that time. The nurse said that he died on the spot. Ethan felt a little sad and wanted to call his family with his cell phone. The nurse informed him that his cell phone and personal belongings were at the police station and that he should focus on resting in the hospital. Hours went by and Ethan was lying in bed without seeing any patients or doctors. He began to feel restless, so he got up, put on his clothes, and walked to the corridor. He wondered what kind of hospital he was in, because it was completely deserted. All the doors and windows of the wards were closed and there was no sign of busyness. He dragged his heavy footsteps and was about to leave the hospital when the nurse suddenly appeared and blocked the elevator door. Ethan insisted on leaving, so the nurse reluctantly gave way. He walked out of the hospital and went to the police station to retrieve his cell phone, but the station was closed in daylight. He had no choice but to go to a nearby bar. He borrowed a phone from a waitress to call his wife and let her know he was okay. However, nobody answered the phone. The waitress named Beverly brought Ethan some food and asked why he came to Wayward Pines. Exhausted, Ethan let his guard down and told her that he was looking for 2 missing colleagues. He had been in a car accident and couldn't contact his family. Beverly showed sympathy when she heard the names of the missing agents, and she wrote down her address on a piece of paper, telling Ethan that he could visit her anytime he had a problem. Ethan felt confused and looked at the back of the paper where the words read, "There are no crickets in Wayward Pines." As he left the bar, he heard the sound of crickets coming from nearby. Ethan remembered the note from Beverly and carefully searched the area. He found a small speaker emitting cricket sounds, which made him feel uneasy. Later that night, he stayed in a motel, but since he had no money, he was asked to leave. With nowhere else to go, Ethan took out the piece of paper Beverly had given him. Later, Ethan went to the address on the paper and arrived at a dilapidated cabin that had been abandoned for a long time. He pushed open the wooden door and found a body tied to the bed. It was one of his missing colleagues. Ethan returned to the police station once more, relieved to finally find someone on duty. He explained his situation to the sheriff, trying to reclaim his personal belongings, and also mentioned the decaying body in the dilapidated cabin. The arrogant sheriff was nonchalant towards Ethan's words, saying that his belongings were not there. Still, he took down the location of the corpse, promising to deal with it eventually. It was clear that the sheriff wasn't taking this matter seriously. Ethan noticed this indifference, but he had to contact his colleagues and family first. His wife's phone was still unreachable. Luckily, someone picked up at the agency. The voice on the other end introduced herself as a new operator. When Ethan requested to speak with his boss or to be given his boss's number, the operator just kept evading the question. Frustrated, Ethan hung up the phone. He realized that something strange was happening in the town, and someone was preventing him from contacting the outside world. Feeling helpless, Ethan returned to the bar and wanted to ask Beverly for more information. However, the bartender said there was no waitress working there. Ethan became frustrated and grabbed the bartender's collar, demanding answers. The bartender punched him in the face, causing Ethan to pass out. When Ethan woke up again, he found himself back in the hospital of Wayward Pines. However, this time his limbs were restrained by handcuffs, rendering him unable to move. A psychiatrist came out and told him that there was a blood clot in his brain that could cause hallucinations and he needed surgery. Ethan was convinced that what he had experienced was not a hallucination and that he did not need brain surgery. However, the nurse ignored his objections and injected him with a sedative, causing him to stop struggling. The nurse then pushed him out of the ward and left him at the entrance of the operating room. Just when Ethan thought he was doomed, he was surprised to find that the person pushing the gurney was none other than Beverly, the waitress from the bar. She had infiltrated the hospital and risked everything to rescue him. Ethan didn't have time to ask why she did it, and they needed to escape the hospital first. The two of them hid in separate rooms. Ethan shattered the mirror and used the broken glass to observe the situation outside. As expected, the crazy nurse came to find them and followed the watermarks on the ground to Beverly's hiding place. The sedative in Ethan's body was taking effect. He struggled to stay awake. When the nurse was hesitating in front of Beverly's room, Ethan suddenly rushed out with the broken mirror and stabbed the nurse in the head, causing her to fall weakly to the ground. Beverly heard the commotion and quickly dragged the drowsy Ethan out of the hospital. They soon arrived at a secluded wooden house where Beverly began to tell Ethan about her own experience. It turned out that she was also an outsider who came to WAYWARD Pines town in 1999 and had been searching for a way to escape for a whole year. As for the missing agent who had died, he was executed by the sheriff because he failed to escape. Ethan was puzzled and deduced that she must have been in WAYWARD Pines for more than a year because it's 2014 now. He then fell asleep again. When Ethan woke up again, Beverly had disappeared. The events of the past few days seemed like a dream. He went to the streets of the town and everything seemed normal. He noticed a lively party nearby and saw a familiar figure, the other missing agent named Kate. However, she looked much older. Ethan did not dare to approach her and followed her from afar. He watched as Kate and a man entered a house, and he mustered the courage to knock on the door. Ethan was sure that the woman was his hormone partner and colleague Kate, but she insisted that he had mistaken her for someone else. Kate quickly dismissed her male companion and warned Ethan in a low voice to be careful because there were cameras everywhere. Ethan was curious as to why Kate appeared to have aged quite a bit. Kate revealed she had been living in this town for 12 years. This revelation left Ethan quite shocked. They were just together a month ago. Kate seemed reluctant to dwell on the matter, as though she was deeply afraid of something. She urged Ethan to leave immediately, hinting that everyone would be in danger if he stayed. Then, with a polite yet distant smile, she turned around and left. Ethan was on the verge of a breakdown. He wanted to leave this creepy town as soon as possible. By chance, he saw a parked car and smashed it with a stone. He quickly started the vehicle and drove away. Passing through unfamiliar streets, he soon arrived at a pine forest trail in the suburbs. When he saw the town nameplate by the road, Ethan felt relieved, believing that he could leave this place. However, to his surprise, after only an hour, he saw the same nameplate again and found himself back in WAYWARD Pines. Realizing that driving away was not an option, Ethan decided to escape on foot. He parked the car on the highway and entered the pine forest alone, heading towards a fixed direction, climbing over hills without following the path. He believed that he would be able to leave the town, but after walking for a day, he found himself facing a tall isolation wall with high-voltage wires above. It was almost impossible to climb over it. Ethan looked at the endless wall in front of him and fell into deep despair. With no other option, he had to go back the way he came. However, just as he got back in the car, the town sheriff caught up with him. Ethan explained that he was a special agent, but the sheriff didn't care and just kept accusing him of stealing the car. Furthermore, he had even confirmed with the Secret Service that there was no such person as Ethan. Fortunately, the sheriff didn't investigate any further and only warned Ethan to stay in the hotel and not try to escape again. Later, lying on the bed, Ethan firmly believed that what he had experienced was not an illusion or a dream, but being trapped in an invisible web in the town. He decided that he must find a way to escape no matter what. Since he couldn't make phone calls to the outside world, he thought of finding clues through the internet or newspapers. However, the hotel clerk informed him that the town had no internet access and newspapers hadn't been delivered for weeks. Ethan decided to return to the dilapidated cabin, only to find that his colleague's body was still there, unprocessed. The stench attracted countless flies. Covering his nose, Ethan discovered a booklet in the corpse's shoes. Just as he picked it up and attempted to browse through it, the sheriff walked in from behind, his gun in hand. Ethan questioned why the body had not been taken for examination yet. The sheriff responded that the forensic expert was on their way and ordered Ethan to return to the hotel immediately and stop wandering around. Ethan glanced at the booklet in the shoe and reluctantly left the cabin. Ethan returned to the bar once more, and this time Beverly was there, proving that the bar owner had lied before. Without pursuing the reason, Ethan asked her how his fellow agent had died. Since the tables and chairs were filled with listening devices, Beverly turned up the volume of the music and pretended to dance as she approached Ethan to whisper. She had planned to escape with Ethan's agent colleague and had arranged a plan which was written in the agent's booklet. Ethan guessed that it was the one in his colleague's boots. Just then, the bar owner returned, and Beverly quickly arranged a meeting place with Ethan, forcing a smile as she pushed him away. She handed Ethan some money and told him to buy something to eat. Ethan took the money and ordered coffee at a cafe. He managed to make a call to the Secret Service, and after some probing, he found out that the operator was an imposter. Ethan didn't have time to complain, as he seemed to have discovered something when he handed over the money. However, before he could take a closer look, the cashier snatched the banknote away. From the cashier, Ethan learned that his hormone partner, Kate, worked at the toy store. Through the toy store window, he saw Kate, her face weathered by time. Ethan couldn't accept how someone he was once so intimate with had become so cold. He approached Kate to ask what she had been through and how their other colleague had died. Before Kate could answer, her husband suddenly appeared and interrupted their conversation. Knowing he wouldn't get any answers here, Ethan pulled out the banknote, emotionally exclaiming that the entire town was using counterfeit money. As a special agent, Kate must have known, and Ethan was puzzled about what she was hiding. Kate remained silent, only telling Ethan that his deceased colleague had a wife. As Ethan prepared to leave the toy store, he saw a notice on the wall. It stated the town's rules: don't try to leave the town, don't discuss the past, and always answer the phone. Later, he found the deceased colleague's home and introduced himself to his wife, but she claimed her husband was never a special agent, and then closed the door. After a day of hitting dead ends, Ethan was at a loss and decided to talk to the sheriff again. Unexpectedly, the sheriff knew all about Ethan's whereabouts during the day and advised him to stay at the hotel and not wander around. Ethan was only concerned about the autopsy report of his deceased colleague, and the sheriff said the body had been transported to the hospital morgue, but the results were not yet available. Ethan then realized he needed to get the booklet and leave the town first. So he returned to the hospital in Wayward Pines, but the booklet was not on the body. Looking around, he found the booklet in a storage box. Ethan then went to the pine forest and met Beverly at the agreed-upon location. He took out his colleague's booklet, which contained a detailed map of the town. Beverly reminded him that before executing any plan, he must remove something from his body. Only then did Ethan learn that when he was unconscious from his injury, a doctor had implanted a tracking device in him. Every resident in the town received such treatment. Beverly then took Ethan to a stone house that could block the signal and helped him remove the chip from his body. Beverly was so concerned because she also wanted to leave this dreadful place. Ethan felt that they needed to plan their escape more carefully. On their way back, Beverly told Ethan that the town's residents were so cautious because those who broke the rules would be severely punished. The deceased colleague was a prime example. Fortunately, the colleague didn't inform Beverly when he tried to escape, which saved her from being implicated. As the two arrived at the town, they happened to meet Kate and her husband. Kate appeared quite natural and invited Ethan and Beverly to have dinner at her house the next evening so that everyone could get to know each other better. Ethan accepted the invitation without waiting for Beverly to respond. Back at the hotel, Ethan studied the map and the booklet carefully. It showed that there was a package hidden in the pine forest, so he wrapped the tracking chip and placed it on the hotel bed. He then went to the pine forest. Following the map's markings, he quickly found the tree where the package was hidden. As Ethan climbed up to retrieve it, a gunshot rang out. Looking around, he saw the sheriff, who was shooting at something in the distance. As evening approached, Ethan and Beverly prepared to visit Kate's house as promised. Beverly wanted to cancel, but Ethan insisted that they must attend because they would execute their escape plan that night. He had already planned their escape route. During the dinner, Ethan would first go to the bathroom to check for surveillance devices, and if there were none, he would hide the tracking chip inside. After the meal, they would immediately retrieve the agent's package hidden in the cemetery, which would help them scale the isolation wall. At dinner, Beverly was very nervous. Ethan stuck the tracking chip under the dining table and left to check Kate's bathroom for surveillance devices. Beverly was left alone at the table, feeling anxious and speaking incoherently. She accidentally revealed that she once had a daughter, which violated the town's rule not to discuss the past. Realizing her mistake, Beverly excused herself to the bathroom. After about 10 minutes, Kate noticed that Beverly hadn't returned and wanted to check on Ethan. This alerted Kate and her husband that the two were planning to escape. Ethan quickly caught up with the panicked Beverly, realizing that they had likely been exposed. Just then, the phones in every household began ringing simultaneously. Beverly was on the verge of a breakdown, remembering that the dying agent who had tried to escape had also experienced this. The sound of angry shouts from the residents filled the room, and Ethan sensed the danger. He quickly fled with Beverly as people started chasing them. He told Beverly to head to the cemetery while he tried to divert the crowd. The residents who answered the phone seemed to have gone mad, chasing Ethan relentlessly, some even armed with weapons. Hiding by a wall, Beverly saw the crowd move away and hurriedly walked towards the cemetery. However, there were too many townspeople, making it easy to be discovered. Eventually, Beverly was caught by 2 residents. Meanwhile, Ethan easily shook off the pursuing crowd and hid in an abandoned building. To his horror, from the second-floor window, he saw Beverly was dragged by 2 strong men onto a stage, with countless cheering and clapping people below, as if attending a grand celebration. The sheriff shouted to the crowd that they must punish the escapees and thanked Kate and her husband as citizens for fulfilling their duty to report the runaway. As he spoke, Beverly's hands were tied to the frame, and she was cruelly executed in front of the audience. Some were horrified, but most were clapping and cheering, seemingly accustomed to the town's control. Ethan watched the ordeal with a look of horror and disgust. After the punishment, Kate and her husband returned home. She asked her husband to go upstairs while she made some hot tea. Kate knew that Ethan had come to see her again. He was furious at Kate for reporting Beverly, but Kate felt she had done nothing wrong, as it was to maintain the town's safety. She handed the tracking chip back to Ethan, stating she had only reported Beverly and advised him to stay put and stop thinking about escaping. He made one last attempt to persuade Kate to escape with him, but she refused without hesitation. The next morning, Ethan went to the dilapidated cabin where Beverly had been left hanging from the ceiling by a rope, much like the previous agent who tried to escape. Ethan took her down and covered her with a curtain. He felt immense guilt, but it only strengthened his determination to escape the town. As he walked along the road, he saw a truck loaded with supplies coming towards him. Since the town couldn't be self-sufficient, he assumed the truck must have come from outside. Seizing the opportunity during unloading, Ethan hid in the truck's cargo hold. His actions were undoubtedly risky, but he thought it was worth it to escape the town. After an unknown amount of time, Ethan felt the truck stop and cautiously opened the door to step out. He found himself in a huge, well-lit warehouse with various unfamiliar devices on both sides. Ethan wasn't sure where he was or whether he had left the town's boundaries. He decided to investigate and figure out exactly where he was. He bypassed many workers and found a hall filled with abandoned vehicles. To his surprise, his wife Teresa's car was among them. Intrigued, Ethan searched the car, which still contained his wife's personal belongings. He couldn't understand how her car ended up here. Suddenly, the car window was shattered, and Ethan pushed open the door to fight back. To his surprise, the assailant was the sheriff. Caught off guard, Ethan was knocked to the ground. When he woke up again, he found himself in a hospital. To his astonishment, the nurse informed him that his wife and child had arrived in Wayward Pines and were settled in the house where Beverly had lived. Ethan couldn't believe it and went to see his wife and son. While he felt some joy, he was mostly worried. The family reunited and embraced. Ethan was curious about how they ended up in the town, so his wife began to recount her journey to find him. After learning about Ethan's car accident, she realized that something was strange. There was no sign of Ethan's body at the scene, and there were no traces of him in the car. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Their son, Ben, had even thought that his father had run away with Kate. It turned out that everyone in the family knew about Ethan's affair. However, his wife Teresa chose to endure it for the sake of their son and started looking for Ethan. Eventually, she discovered in the Secret Service's network that her husband had gone to Wayward Pines before the accident. So, she took her child and set out for the town in search of clues. Before they reached their destination, they encountered the sheriff, who used a random excuse to tamper with their car. As a result, they also had an accident and woke up in the hospital in Wayward Pines. A real estate agent brought them to a house and accommodated them there. Although Ethan was curious about his wife's experience, he couldn't help but ask the real estate agent if the house belonged to Beverly. The agent replied that it hadn't since Beverly's death, and kindly reminded Ethan about the latest surveillance system installed. Ethan didn't want his wife and child to be trapped in this place like he was, so he warned his wife not to wander around and not to talk to anyone. Then, he ran out and headed straight for the police station. To his surprise, not only was the sheriff there, but the hospital nurse as well. Ethan demanded to know why they had brought his family to this place. The sheriff said that they did it in the hope that Ethan and his family could live happily in Wayward Pines and stop thinking about escaping. Hearing this, Ethan became even angrier. As they argued, a mysterious phone call suddenly came in, reminding the sheriff to stop. It was then that Ethan realized that there was a mastermind behind the sheriff and that he was just a puppet working for someone else. Knowing that arguing further would be pointless, Ethan turned around and left. On his way out, he happened to run into the psychiatrist, who was well aware of Ethan's situation. The doctor advised him that no one in the town had the privilege of living with their original family like he did, and he should stop thinking about escaping. The town needed talented people like him. However, Ethan ignored the doctor's advice and said he didn't belong here before leaving. Instead of going home, he met up with Kate in the pine forest where there were no surveillance cameras. Kate could finally speak her mind. To Ethan, it might have been only a month since they last met, but for Kate, she had spent 12 years in the town, and all her feelings had worn away. She had thought about leaving in the past, but after multiple failures, she gradually accepted reality. Only by obeying the town's rules could she stay alive. After hearing this, Ethan had to suppress his emotions. However, when he returned home, he found that his wife and child were gone. A wedding ring was left on the table. It turned out that while Ethan was meeting Kate in the forest, his suspicious son had secretly followed him and discovered the meeting between his father and Kate. He ran to tell his mother, Teresa. Having traveled a long distance to find her husband, she was heartbroken to learn that he was still unfaithful. In anger, she decided to leave the town with her son that night. As they were about to reach the isolation wall, the sheriff caught up with them. His patience with Ethan's family had reached its limit, and he wanted to shoot the mother and son. Fortunately, Ethan appeared in time and wrestled his muscles with the sheriff. Just as the sheriff was about to shoot, a car came and hit him. It turned out to be their son's timely intervention. The injured sheriff seemed to know a lot, but Ethan didn't want to hear it. He shot the sheriff and took the key to the isolation zone's gate from his body. Ethan pressed the switch, and the gate slowly lifted. Suddenly, a dark shadow emerged from the gate, snatching the sheriff's dead body and making a strange noise. Frightened, Ethan quickly closed the gate and hurriedly drove away. Ethan's family was terrified. They finally returned home and washed the blood off their son. Ethan told his wife about the strange events that had happened since he came to the town. He advised her to be cautious and pretend to live a normal life until they could all leave. Early the next morning, Ethan went to the police station to find a gun for protection. However, the mayor and his secretary entered the office, congratulating Ethan on becoming the new sheriff, and even brought a cake to celebrate. Before Ethan could react, the mayor and his secretary held a newspaper announcing the sheriff's retirement and took a group photo. Ethan was dumbfounded. He wanted to ask who had appointed him, but the mayor hesitated to answer, and instead warned Ethan that all he needed to do was follow the rules and not ask too many questions. Realizing that becoming the sheriff position would make it easier to escape, Ethan pretended to be delighted and assured them that he would perform his role well. After the mayor left the police station, Ethan began searching everywhere, hoping to find some clues. Eventually, he found files on all the town's residents hidden in a secret compartment. Just as he was about to have a serious talk with the secretary, a man was brought into the office. Ethan recognized him as the kind-hearted real estate agent. Nurse Pam accused the man of vandalizing public facilities and spreading harmful ideas, insisting that he should be punished. Ethan sensed that Pam intended to have the man executed, so he quickly stated that he would handle the situation himself. He then took out the man's file, trying to learn more about his past. The man said he couldn't remember how many years he had spent in the town. He missed his wife and hated the town's lack of freedom. This could be seen from his graffiti. Ethan wanted to ask more questions, but received a call from Nurse Pam, who informed him that the man must be publicly executed at 10 p.m. the next night. Ethan pretended it was a telemarketing call, but the man knew his fate had been decided by this phone call. Ethan strongly resisted such hasty executions and hated the town even more. However, everyone in the town seemed to be very kind to Ethan's family. The next day, they arranged for Ethan's son, Ben, to attend the local high school. In the evening, a celebration was held for Ethan's new position. Nurse Pam proposed everyone to congratulate Ethan on his new role, while reminding him that those who violated the town's rules must be punished. Ethan couldn't take it anymore and interrupted Pam, declaring that as long as he was in the town, he would make sure that evil had nowhere to hide and that real criminals would be brought to justice. His words seemed to make sense, but in Ethan's view, all the residents of the town were evil criminals. After the banquet, Ethan asked his wife to go home first, while he went to the police station and opened the cell door holding the man, urging him to leave quickly to avoid punishment. Instead of expressing gratitude, the man suggested going to the isolation wall. The two soon arrived at their destination, and the man raised a long-standing question. Was the wall to prevent people from leaving or to prevent outsiders from entering? This reminded Ethan of the scene from the previous night when the sheriff's corpse was dragged away by unknown forces. Despite this, he had not given up on the idea of escaping. The man seemed to guess Ethan's thoughts and pointed to a cliff not far away, saying that it was not electrified and was the only way out. It turns out years ago the man had tried to escape from there but failed and broke a leg. Now, with his limited mobility, he had lost all hope of escape. He hugged Ethan sadly, then suddenly rushed towards the wall. Sparks flew from the wall, and a dazzling light emitted as the man was electrocuted. Ethan watched the scene in shock. Then he made a decision. He told his wife to live well in the town, while he prepared to leave the town by climbing the cliff alone. He would seek help in the outside world and bring his wife and son out later. Ethan went to the police station and packed a bag full of weapons, then went to the foot of the cliff that night and began to climb. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, and he reached the top of the cliff. Ahead was still a dense pine forest, but Ethan was sure he was now outside the isolation wall. As the man had said, whether the isolation wall was to prevent the townspeople from leaving or to prevent something from the outside from entering, Ethan had a vague answer in his mind. However, he refused to be trapped in the town for the rest of his life. Not far behind Ethan, a strange figure was watching him intently. Suddenly, a dark shadow swept past him. He quickly fired his gun, but the creature was too fast, and Ethan's arm was wounded. He followed the shadow, but couldn't see what it was. Ethan had no choice but to spend the night leaning against the slope. The next day, Ethan did not encounter any attacks from the unknown creature. He took out a map and prepared to cross the pine forest to seek help in the nearest city. Meanwhile, his son had arrived at his new school and started the first day of orientation. There were 2 other freshmen with him. The training room was a closed, all-white space. Teacher Megan entered, pushing a projector. After turning on the device, the screen displayed numbered students. Like them, only those who successfully passed the test and became members of the first generation would be eligible to learn more about the truth. The girl and boy exchanged glances, not understanding what Teacher Megan meant by the first generation. She did not explain, but showed another picture. The boy noticed a strange figure in the corner. Upon zooming in, it was a hairless, hideous humanoid creature. Teacher Megan said they were mutants, evolved in harsh environments, and had become the top predators in the food chain. Apparently, what Ethan had encountered was the mutant that the teacher mentioned. He also felt that he was being watched, so he quickly moved through the woods. Accidentally encountering an animal carcass, Ethan came up with an idea. He cut open the animal's stomach and hid behind its body, using it to mask his scent. This tactic worked well, allowing Ethan to successfully evade pursuit. However, he also witnessed the horror of the mutants firsthand. In the classroom, the 3 students were dumbfounded after hearing the teacher's description, especially the part about mutants being evolved from humans. After the first training session, Ben had no appetite and kept pondering the teacher's words. A new classmate came over to comfort him, saying that he would get used to it in time. Apparently, all the students in the school had gone through this training. Soon, the second training session began. Teacher Megan gave each of them an ancient coin. To their amazement, the date on the coin was 2095. She asked them to think about the last thing they experienced before coming to Wayward Pines. All 3 answered that it was related to a car accident. The teacher asked if they knew how long they had been unconscious, whether it was just a few hours or a couple of days. In fact, their accidents were not coincidental. They were deliberately chosen to be brought here. Each person who had a car accident had been sleeping in a hibernation chamber for over 2,000 years. It was now 4028, not 2014. Human civilization had disappeared over 2,000 years ago, and the world was now ruled by mutants. On the other side, Ethan was crossing the pine forest. After finally climbing over the mountain cliffs, everything he saw seemed to confirm what Teacher Megan had said. The students could not accept the fact that they had been asleep for thousands of years. Ben asked why they were chosen. The teacher replied that it was to ensure the survival and reproduction of humanity. Over 2,000 years ago, a great scientist predicted that the continuous deterioration of the Earth's environment would lead to the emergence of mutants. So he thought of an escape plan for humanity early on, intending to build a sanctuary to preserve the human race. Ben was shocked and asked who this scientist was. The teacher told him the scientist was Dr. Jenkins. Meanwhile, Ethan saw a helicopter approaching from a distance. He finally encountered living people and decided to see who they were first. Unexpectedly, a fat man jumped out of the plane. It was the exact psychiatrist from Wayward Pines. Ethan raised his gun in caution, but the psychiatrist remained calm, saying that he needed to reintroduce himself. It turned out he was Dr. Jenkins, the creator of Wayward Pines. Now that Ethan had seen the destroyed human civilization, he urged him to hurry back to the town. At this point, the training for the students was nearing its end. The teacher instructed them not to disclose anything they had heard here to their parents. The future of Wayward Pines would be in the hands of these young people because adults who had spent too long in the previous world would generally find it difficult to accept the fact of civilization's destruction. This is why the town rules that people should not mention the past. Many students' parents had chosen to end their lives after learning this information. The three students gradually began to accept their identity as the so-called first generation. However, the training course was not yet over. A large door opened before the three of them, revealing a grand welcoming ceremony. As all the students watched, the candles of the three newcomers were lit. The students below clapped their hands, creating a wave of applause. Ben looked at everything in amazement, as if he was placed in a grand historical mission. Meanwhile, Ethan was still hesitating, but the sounds of the mutants around him were getting closer. Dr. Jenkins called out for him to leave quickly, and Ethan had no choice but to follow. After the helicopter took off, Ethan clearly saw several mutants running out of the forest. The helicopter flew over the town, through layers of mountains, and finally landed beside a cliff. Dr. Jenkins led Ethan into his base, where many staff members were busy working. This was the true control center of Wayward Pines, ensuring that residents did not have to worry about supplies for survival. Dr. Jenkins explained that over 200 volunteers were involved in the construction of Wayward Pines. Ethan saw several switchboard operators and realized that the phone calls he had made when entering and leaving the town must have been intercepted by them. Afterwards, Dr. Jenkins had Nurse Pam tend to Ethan's wounds first. It was not until now that the man digested the information he had heard. Shortly after Pam had cleaned the wound and left, Ethan suddenly heard a strange scream. He followed the sound and came to a dark laboratory. From a distance, sounds similar to those of a cheetah could be heard occasionally. As Ethan approached a glass window, a mutant with bared fangs and claws suddenly stood up, startling him a lot. Dr. Jenkins and several guards rushed in and quickly activated the freezing gas inside, putting the mutant to sleep. This was Ethan's first close-up encounter with a mutant, and he couldn't help but be curious. Dr. Jenkins explained that they had been researching mutants for more than 2,000 years, and the changes they were experiencing were actually a result of humans adapting to the devastated Earth environment. At the time, he had shared his discovery and predictions with everyone, but they had all scoffed at him. Only his sister Pam supported him, so he used his savings to establish the lab. Since they couldn't protect all of humanity, they could only select a portion of the population to protect. They spent most of the funds on researching cryogenic technology and dealing with disappearance cases. This was also the reason why Ethan had not found any clues after his car accident. The two came to the innermost layer of the base. There was a chosen individual who had been pushed out of the hibernation chamber, having been asleep for a full 2,000 years. It was believed that in no time, he would also become a member of Wayward Pines. Leaving the room, Ethan entered the surveillance center where screens displayed various scenes. By now, he understood everything was done for the safety of Wayward Pines. Subsequently, the two arrived at a massive storage room where countless hibernation chambers were revealed to Ethan. Inside these chambers were humans under dormancy. Then, Ethan spotted a little girl stored in one of the cabinets, which made him feel uneasy. He believed that Dr. Jenkins was blatantly kidnapping these people who hadn't chosen to be in Wayward Pines. Dr. Jenkins ignored his bullshit and began talking about his experiences before launching the project. He had once publicly recruited volunteers to go to Wayward Pines, but unfortunately, only a handful of people signed up to the project, including teacher Megan and the former sheriff. So he had to change his strategy, allowing the sheriff to abduct people who were struggling in life or had special talents. However, after hearing this, Ethan still didn't agree with Dr. Jenkins, wondering whether these forced people would really help maintain the town's stability. Dr. Jenkins then told Ethan that he, the sheriff, and Nurse Pam were among the first to awaken from the hibernation chambers. After 2,000 years, Earth's climate had restarted, making it suitable for human survival again. Like their human ancestors, Dr. Jenkins and his followers began reviving more people until they built the present-day Wayward Pines. This place was the new spark of human civilization, and Dr. Jenkins wouldn't allow anyone to jeopardize its safety. He needed someone like Ethan, who was capable of making smart decisions and acting decisively to help the town grow and prosper. Ethan shook his head, believing that the right course of action would be to end the surveillance, abolish private punishment, and reveal the truth to everyone. However, Dr. Jenkins had tried that, but most people couldn't handle the desperate reality, leading to suicides, escapes, and deliberate destruction. They didn't have enough armed forces to stop these incidents, and the result was the complete destruction of the town. Wayward Pines was actually the second town built by Dr. Jenkins. Since then, he had stopped placing his hopes on adults and started focusing on the new generation, gradually exposing them to the harsh truth. However, before the first generation could grow up, it was crucial for Ethan to protect the safety of the town. Moreover, Dr. Jenkins sensed that some residents had already formed their faction, removed their chips, and were plotting to blow up the isolation wall, which would bring disaster to the town. After the revelation, Ethan claimed that he would do whatever it took to protect the safety of Wayward Pines. In the year 4028 AD, human civilization had nearly perished, and carnivorous mutants ruled the earth. The remaining humans lived in Wayward Pines, protecting their last civilization. Ethan gradually uncovered the truth about the world. However, he began to wonder if he should truly protect the town according to the founder's will, given the town's existence under brutal rule. Ethan fell into deep thought and couldn't sleep that night. In the morning, his wife noticed his unusual state. Ethan didn't intend to hide the truth and told her that monsters roamed the outside world and Wayward Pines was the last bastion of human civilization. Leaving the town would mean certain death. Teresa couldn't believe that. Just the day before, her husband had been determined to find a way out, and now he wanted to stay in Wayward Pines. She suspected that the hospital had done something to him. Ethan knew he couldn't explain everything right away, so he decided to send the kid to school first. However, when he started the car, he noticed something odd about the electronic devices. Concerned for the safety of his wife and son, Ethan cautiously advised Teresa and Ben to walk to school, while he dealt with the malfunction. Once they left, Ethan discovered a cylindrical device connected by metal wires under the hood. He brought it back to his office for inspection, only to find out that it was a small bomb. Ethan believed that if ignited, his car would have been engulfed in flames. He quickly searched through the town's resident records and found a suspicious bomb engineer. Ethan recalled what Dr. Jenkins had mentioned about some criminals planning to destroy the isolation wall. But Ethan didn't expect that the scale of this criminal organization was far beyond his imagination. Their leader was none other than Ethan's colleague, Agent Kate, and her group included her husband, Harold, a driver, an engineer, and some other followers. They had started planning long ago, secretly collecting materials to make bombs, determined to destroy the isolation wall at all costs, and escape the dictatorial town devoid of freedom. Fortunately, Ethan discovered the bomb engineer in time and decided to use this as a breakthrough to expose the group. During the surveillance process, Ethan saw the engineer and Harold gathering at a cafe. Pretending to bump into them coincidentally, he tried to join their conversation. However, the engineer left in a panic upon seeing Ethan. With his years of experience as an agent, Ethan was certain that something was off with these two. He then asked Harold about the bomb in his car. Harold shook his head, claiming ignorance. Ethan decided to take him to the station for questioning, but Harold attempted to flee as soon as they left the cafe. Ethan quickly subdued him, interpreting his actions as a guilty conscience. Back at the station, Harold realized the predicament he was in and asked Ethan if he didn't want to leave the town and explore other places. Ethan finally confirmed that the man before him was one of the criminals. He asked Harold to write down the mastermind's name, but Harold insisted he was the only one involved in the operation. Ethan believed that Harold, a former carpenter, didn't have the ability to orchestrate the entire operation. So he wrote a note and asked Harold to pass it on to Kate. Unexpectedly, after receiving the note, Kate immediately went to Ethan's residence. Ethan had already guessed that only Kate, with her agent background, had the ability to organize such a secretive group in a town full of surveillance. He indicated to Kate that she could speak freely, as he had removed all the monitoring devices from his home. Kate didn't hold back, admitting her role as the leader of the group. Initially, it was just 4 or 5 people gathering to talk and share their thoughts, but they gradually reached a consensus to escape the town and return to their familiar homeland. Ethan urged Kate to stop, informing her that their homeland no longer existed and that it was not 2014, but the year 4028 now. Kate looked puzzled, but Ethan didn't expect her to accept the truth immediately. He then promised that if Kate handed over the remaining bombs, all their previous actions would be forgiven. She agreed. However, once she returned to the toy store, she told Harold that Ethan had sided with the town and that they needed to take action that night. As darkness fell, Kate led her group to the number 33 isolation wall. After destroying the surveillance camera above, the engineer hastily installed the bomb, setting the timer for 10 minutes. But as soon as the number 33 camera lost its signal, the control center contacted Ethan to investigate. Already on high alert, he rushed towards that point. Ethan arrived just in time. Before the bomb could be activated, he managed to deter the criminals with his gun. Seeing their leader being subdued by Ethan, the engineer reluctantly disarmed the timed bomb. Kate and her group were taken back to the police station. Once close partners, they now found themselves on opposite sides. Kate believed Ethan had been deceived, while Ethan thought Kate's ideas were far-fetched and urged her to abandon her escape plans. However, Kate told him that this was only the beginning. It was then that Ethan realized Kate's husband Harold was not present, and they must have had a backup plan. Frustrated, Ethan hurried to retrieve Harold's footage. He discovered that Harold had secretly handed a paper bag to the truck driver, whose route happened to pass by another isolation wall. Ethan figured out Kate and Harold had divided their forces early on. One group was sent to destroy the number 33, while the others were assigned to detonate another section of the isolation wall. What Ethan didn't know was that the bomb in his car had also been planted by the truck driver earlier. Apparently, the driver felt that Ethan was a real threat to their escape plan and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. At this moment, Ethan was driving after the truck. Unexpectedly, his son Ben and his classmate Amy were in the truck's cargo compartment. They had initially planned to sneak a ride to the woods near the wall for a date. Amy accidentally spotted the bag placed by the driver and found a music box inside. The girl was unaware that it was actually a time bomb. As the lively music played, Amy and Ben grew closer. By now, Ethan had already spotted the truck in the distance. As he was about to overtake it, Harold and two others appeared, blocking the road with a metal container. Ethan had no choice but to crash into it, but the car could no longer function. He had to leave the car and chase the truck on foot. As the truck slowed down to yield to pedestrians, Ethan was about to catch up when an explosion sounded. He was blown off his feet by the blast. Staggering to his feet, Ethan found Amy bleeding profusely and his son Ben lying motionless on the ground. He took the two to the hospital, looking anxiously at his son being wheeled into the emergency room. Dr. Jenkins learned of the incident and rushed to the hospital. His concern was not for Ben's safety, but the impact of the explosion on the townspeople. He instructed Nurse Pam to explain that it was caused by a pipeline explosion. To alleviate their concerns, he quickly organized a celebratory event in the town. However, news of the incident spread rapidly through the town. Dr. Jenkins realized that dissatisfaction and fear were spreading among the residents. Although everyone in the town attended the celebration, they remained somber. Dr. Jenkins asked the mayor to take the stage and reassure the crowd. Before he could say much, Ethan pushed through the audience, stormed onto the stage, and interrupted the mayor's speech. He had no intention of concealing the truth, according to Dr. Jenkins's wishes. He revealed the truth about the previous night and urged everyone to return home immediately, as the perpetrators behind the explosion could strike again at any moment. Dr. Jenkins believed that Ethan's actions had caused unnecessary panic, but Ethan was convinced that he was right. The two parted ways on bad terms. Dr. Jenkins thought that the monitoring staff should also be held accountable for the current situation. He arranged for his sister Pam to investigate thoroughly, and as expected, they found that one of the monitoring staff was problematic. He upheld the exploration of the unknown, so he deleted some residents' violation footage. Although Pam did not agree with his approach, she still concealed the matter from Dr. Jenkins, claiming that all the staff were problem-free. However, Dr. Jenkins had also installed surveillance equipment in the interrogation room and quickly exposed Pam's lies. He believed that anyone who violated the rules should be punished, while Pam argued that these staff members had joined voluntarily and should not be subjected to the same penalties as the townspeople. Dr. Jenkins insisted on putting the rule-breaking member back to dormancy, hoping that this would serve as a deterrent. For the first time, Pam questioned her brother's management, believing that such oppressive rule would eventually cause significant problems. Meanwhile, the failed Harold and the truck driver were hiding in the pine forest, with one of their companions severely injured by Ethan. The next morning, the injured companion passed away. As Harold prepared to bury his dead comrade, the truck driver said they shouldn't bury him here. Instead, they should bury him on the other side of the fence, in the land of freedom. Subsequently, the truck driver and Harold pried open the lock on a garage where a huge truck was stored. The two planned to use it to break through the wall, taking their dead companion out of the town. However, Harold couldn't bear to leave Kate behind in the police station, so he decided to let the truck driver complete the mission alone. The man started the truck. As he approached the isolation wall without any intention of slowing down, he crashed into it with a belief in freedom. The driver's goal was finally achieved, creating a large gap in the wall. He dragged his companion's body out and wept with joy in the pine forest. Little did he know that something terrifying was waiting for him, and the town of Wayward Pines would soon face unimaginable disaster as a result of his reckless actions. Since the only remaining human settlement was compromised, the mutated creatures lurking outside finally saw their opportunity. One of them approached the gap created by the truck and crawled in from under the vehicle. Then it let out an excited roar. Suddenly, a bright light shone on it, and a car sped past, crushing the mutated creature under its wheels. It turned out that Ethan had arrived. It's revealed that during the day, Ethan received a report that a large truck from the engineering department had been stolen. He realized that Harold and his accomplices were behind it, so he drove around looking for them. On the way, he happened to encounter Harold, who was preparing to return to the town. Ethan didn't bother talking to him, and instead aimed his gun at Harold to intimidate him. After some interrogation, he finally learned the whereabouts of the truck driver. Unfortunately, Ethan was a step too late. He ran over a mutated creature and fired several shots at the truck's tires, blocking the gap. The other mutated creatures attempting to crawl in were crushed in an instant. Soon after, construction workers arrived at the scene and began repairing the damaged fence. Although Ethan played a crucial role in averting the crisis, Dr. Jenkins still harbored resentment towards him. He insisted that the criminals in the police station should be executed to quell the rebellion. Ethan was torn, as he wanted to use Kate, Harold, and the others to find out the whereabouts of the rest of their group. Dr. Jenkins scoffed at the idea. The residents of Wayward Pines, especially the younger generation, had grown accustomed to the lifestyles, and they accepted anyone who violated the rules had to be punished. Just then, several students had stormed the police station, demanding the execution of the captured Kate and her accomplices. Fortunately, the assistant managed to persuade the students to back off. However, Ethan insisted on sticking to his principles and didn't intend to execute the criminals. Instead, he brought Harold into the interrogation room, demanding that he write down the names of his accomplices. He then showed him several gruesome photos of the truck driver who had been killed by the mutated creatures. After seeing the pictures, Harold began to believe in the doom of human civilization and eventually provided a list of 14 names. Ethan went to the monitoring center and found that all 14 individuals were gathered in a bar, but they were nowhere to be seen on the surveillance footage. They then discovered that the group's tracking chips had been thrown into drink glasses, and their whereabouts were unknown. Ethan and Dr. Jenkins knew that these 14 individuals were like ticking time bombs in the town, capable of causing more destruction to the isolation wall at any time. Meanwhile, Ethan's son Ben recovered his health after surgery, and teacher Megan came to visit. However, she had malicious intentions, saying that if it weren't for Ethan letting Harold go earlier, Ben and Amy wouldn't have been injured. She asked Ben to answer whether the town's safety should rely on punishment or leniency. As Ben struggled with this dilemma, he suddenly heard a commotion outside the window. It turned out that teacher Megan had brought a group of students with her. They all believed that it was not Harold and his group that caused Ben and Amy's injuries, but the town's new sheriff, Ethan. Under teacher Megan's persuasion, Ben began to publicly condemn his father. Just then, he received bad news from the hospital that his girlfriend Amy had suddenly suffered a brain hemorrhage and her life was hanging in the balance. This made him begin to resent his father, stating that as the future generation of the town, they should punish those who don't follow the rules. As a sheriff, Ethan had been ineffective at executing rules. The students were excited after hearing his comments. Ethan, who saw this scene in the surveillance center, felt heartbroken, but when he saw the students angrily leaving, he sensed that something bad was about to happen. So he hurriedly ran outside. This time, the three students went straight to the police station. They stopped the assistant who wanted to call for help and demanded the cell keys. Since Ethan was not doing anything, the future of the town would be protected by them. The leader took out a gun and distributed it to his classmates, who were clearly blinded by rage and refused to listen to anyone else's advice. The captured criminals were dragged out one by one. Kate tried to argue, but was knocked down by the leader with a single shot. Harold, the engineer, and several other men were forced to kneel down, reciting the rules of Wayward Pines. Unexpectedly, the leader didn't stop there, but aimed his gun at Harold. Kate and the assistant witnessed several people being shot and killed. The leader then pointed his gun at Kate. Luckily, Ethan appeared in time and shot him, instantly calming the situation. After locking several students in a room, Ethan approached Kate, hoping she could reveal the whereabouts of her remaining companions, or else more casualties would occur. However, Kate had already made up her mind to die. She knew that there were many fanatics in the town, and it would be difficult for her and Ethan to change anything. She hoped that Ethan could execute her according to the rules, which would be better than dying at the hands of others. Just then, Teresa arrived saying she had something to show Ethan and Kate. Just a few hours earlier, Teresa, who was at the hospital taking care of her son, was pulled by Nurse Pam into an unmonitored corner. Pam secretly handed her a card and mentioned an address. Driven by curiosity, Teresa followed the address and found a deserted plot of land with a single wooden house. She disabled the surveillance and entered the house, where the floor was covered in leaves. Probing the ground with her foot, Teresa discovered a hidden passage underneath, with a long staircase leading to the deepest part. She turned on her flashlight and followed the passage until a door appeared in front of her. She tried the card Pam had given her, and miraculously, the door opened. Upon seeing what was inside, she immediately called Ethan and Kate. In the center, there was a computer containing many videos, all of which were logs filmed by survivors who had escaped from Wayward Pines. Looking at the ruined buildings outside, the two women finally believed Ethan's words. However, Kate still wondered why Dr. Jenkins didn't tell everyone the truth. Ethan summed it up well, saying that Dr. Jenkins was a control freak. At this point, what Ethan wanted most was to make all the residents understand the truth, so that the town's rebellion could be completely quelled. Kate also agreed with this. After discussing their options, the three of them came up with a plan. Meanwhile, Dr. Jenkins was in the monitoring center, intently watching the video feed, trying to find the whereabouts of the remaining criminals. Pam pretended to be helpful and comforted him, saying that all they could do now was to wait and see. Pam's feelings were complex, as she had long been dissatisfied with her brother's dictatorship. This is why she gave Teresa the access card to the secret room, hoping that Ethan could gather enough evidence to let the townspeople learn the truth. What's more, she knew that the secret room also served as a passage connecting the control base and Wayward Pines. Just then, an operator reported to Dr. Jenkins that Ethan had something important to discuss with him. In the reception room, Ethan appeared disheartened. He decided to accept Dr. Jenkins's suggestion and execute Kate at midnight, believing it to be the best option to quell the rebellion. His only request was that all town residents attend, so Dr. Jenkins handed him the phone without hesitation. The ringing of phones broke the silence of the night as everyone gathered in the square, their excitement filling the air. Ethan dragged Kate onto the platform, his weapon held against her throat. When he saw that most people had arrived, he suddenly lowered his hand. Under the astonished gazes of the crowd, he shouted that it was time to tell everyone the truth. He then explained in detail how the residents came to Wayward Pines, what had become of the outside world, and condemned Dr. Jenkins's prison-like governing style that kept everyone living in violence and fear. The once rowdy crowd became eerily quiet. Kate stepped forward to support Ethan, stating that they did all of this to show Dr. Jenkins that the people would not resort to killing each other upon knowing the truth, but would become even stronger. Dr. Jenkins's loyal supporter, teacher Megan, attempted to argue that Ethan and the others were lying, but the silent stares from the others were the best response. It was also a rebellion against the cruel oppression they had experienced for years. Just as teacher Megan tried to say something else, the lights suddenly went out, plunging the scene into darkness. In the monitoring center, Pam stared in shock, seeming to know something. It turned out that Dr. Jenkins had cut off the town's power supply from his office. The prison, hospital, residential buildings, all were shrouded in darkness. Even the isolation wall protecting the town's safety lost power. Dr. Jenkins watched with cold eyes as one mutant after another climbed the fence. It seems that he is going to abandon the town. This is both a retaliation for Ethan's betrayal and a deep hatred for the townspeople. Because his authority has been challenged, this man plans to start over and build a new town. The only remaining human town is about to face a catastrophe. The monitoring center detected that 6 mutant creatures had already crossed the barrier, and there was a large group coming from behind. Ethan decided to let everyone find shelter in the basement, but he couldn't leave himself. His wife, Teresa, had to go to the hospital to pick up their son, and Ethan and Kate had to go to the police station to distribute the weapons to the people. Kate's men also found a pack of explosives left by the bomb engineer before he died. After that, Ethan was going to the hospital to meet his wife and son. The fanatics locked in the room realized that something was wrong and shouted to be let out. However, Kate hated them and decided to let them fend for themselves. The hospital had activated its backup power. Teresa was discussing how to take Amy away. Suddenly, the hospital lights went out again. The doctors suspected that the generator had a problem and ran to check the power. Unexpectedly, a mutant suddenly appeared. Teresa heard the commotion and went out to investigate. She found a mutant not far away and quickly retreated back to the room. She realized that this place was not safe for them to stay for long. She and her son Ben took Amy and walked towards the hospital exit. The group cautiously avoided the mutants and had to temporarily hide in an office. Teresa held her breath and reached for the door handle to close it, but suddenly a mutated hand appeared. Teresa managed to push it away and then picked up a syringe to stab the approaching mutant. Suddenly, a gunshot was heard. It turned out that Ethan had arrived just in time. A large number of mutants had entered the town. Many residents did not have time to evacuate and had never seen such monsters before. They were scared and scattered in all directions. People were constantly being attacked by these bloodthirsty monsters, and the street was chaotic, like a purgatory on Earth. Fortunately, Kate and her team appeared in time and shot down these terrible creatures, buying some time for the town residents. Although their firepower was strong, they were outnumbered by the mutants. The few soldiers could only fight and retreat. Kate ran out of bullets and had to retreat into a small store. She realized that this was the toy store she used to run with Harold, but everything was different now. Suddenly, there was a commotion on the roof. Kate saw a mutant falling from the sky. In sorrow and anger, she smashed the monster to death. When she walked out of the store again, the battle outside had already subsided. The ground was covered with the bodies of the townspeople. Kate saw a fellow who had been eaten by mutants and pointed to the backpack on the ground. She knew that there were explosives inside. She quickly picked up the backpack and walked towards the direction of the secret room. By this time, a large number of residents had arrived here. After Ethan arrived with his family, they were ready to enter the secret room. Kate also arrived just in time. They quickly locked the door of the secret room. Ethan felt that staying there all the time was not a solution. He saw Teacher Megan and asked her where this secret room led to. She didn't answer but boasted that Dr. Jenkins would come to save them. After hearing this, Ben couldn't take it anymore. He had realized what Dr. Jenkins and Teacher Megan had done to the incident. He scolded Dr. Jenkins for being full of lies and self-proclaimed savior, but now he was letting everyone in danger. Teacher Megan was unable to refute and finally told everyone that this was the tunnel connecting the town and the control base. As long as they kept going forward, they could reach the base. She even gave the door password. Ethan didn't dare to delay and quickly led everyone towards the base. The mayor found that Teacher Megan was still staying behind and urged her to leave quickly. But she said her students had not come in yet, so she had to stay here to open the door for them. The mayor could not persuade her and left in a hurry. The students locked up in the police station had no idea that someone cared about them. As they lost hope, a group of classmates walked in, and to everyone's surprise, they did not head to the shelter to meet their teacher. Instead, they arrived at a wall and pressed a switch. Then, a huge storage room appeared before them, filled with weapons and supplies prepared by Dr. Jenkins for the new generation of young people. Meanwhile, survivors in the shelter made their way through the dark tunnel and arrived at a large door. Kate entered the password and the door opened, revealing an elevator that led directly to the control base. Ethan and Kate decided to clear the obstacles before heading up, but they were unaware that chaos was also happening inside the base. Earlier, Pam had seen more and more mutants approaching the town, and feeling sympathetic, she went to see her brother in the control base, hoping that he would restart the power and electrify the isolation wall to protect the townspeople. But Dr. Jenkins remained stubborn and believed that these people were beyond saving. He thought that as long as he awakened new residents after the mutants migrated away in the winter, everything would start anew. Pam disagreed and felt that there were still living people outside. Dr. Jenkins sensed that his sister was drifting away from him and called the guards to take her away. Some soldiers began to feel sympathetic towards Pam and tried to stop the guards from doing that. However, the guards knocked Pam unconscious and prepared to freeze her with a cryogenic suit. Pam looked at her brother, but Dr. Jenkins turned a blind eye and left resolutely. Meanwhile, Ethan and Kate in the elevator were ready. As soon as the door opened, they started shooting, taking down the guards in no time. The soldier guarding Pam rushed towards the elevator. However, one soldier, a loyal follower of Pam, did not follow. He forced the operator to release Pam. Ethan and Kate quickly eliminated the supporting soldiers. Ethan then used the intercom to call his wife, telling everyone to come up. As he was about to open the elevator door, teacher Megan in the tunnel entrance suddenly heard some commotion outside. To her surprise, the mutants had broken in and were rushing towards the tunnel. The people near the elevator also noticed something off and rushed into the elevator. However, there were too many people, so Teresa, her son, and a few others could only take the next elevator. When the first group of survivors arrived at the base, Ethan learned that his family had not come up in time. He took Kate's explosives backpack and went into the elevator, instructing her to find Dr. Jenkins and restore power to the isolation wall. At this moment, Teresa and several others had already seen the creatures charging towards them from afar. Ben raised his gun and fired, but was soon overwhelmed. Luckily, Ethan arrived just in time and began to shoot at the creatures, stopping them in their tracks. Ethan quickly closed the elevator, trapping the creatures outside. However, the elevator suddenly stopped working. It turned out that the creatures had climbed into the elevator shaft. Ethan discovered that the top of the elevator could be opened. He instructed everyone to climb out of the elevator and escape to the base through the ladder. However, Ethan knew that with their speed, the mutants would catch up with them sooner or later. He reluctantly shook hands with his son and instructed him to protect his mother, while he stayed behind to cover their escape. He then took out the explosives from his backpack and began to assemble them. At this time, Dr. Jenkins was watching the elevator chaos with indifference. Suddenly, Kate rushed in with a gun and forced Dr. Jenkins to restore the power. However, he showed no signs of remorse and remained convinced that everything he did was for the sake of the human race. Just then, a gunshot sounded, and Pam arrived to take control of the situation. She then ordered to restore the power. At this point, everyone had entered the base except for Ethan, who sat in the elevator with a few explosives in front of him, thinking back to the happy times with his family. Suddenly, several terrifying hands reached out from the elevator, and more hands appeared. Ethan quickly pressed the switch, and an explosion sounded. The elevator plummeted like a fireball, and Ethan was gone forever. Ben shouted out loud, calling for his father, but he was hit by falling debris and fell into a coma on the spot. When he woke up, he saw his girlfriend Amy dressed as a nurse. He was curious how long he had been unconscious, and Amy replied that it had been 3 years. She then turned off the monitoring equipment at the bedside and whispered that the other adults had been put under dormancy. Unable to accept this reality, Ben put on his clothes and went back to the streets of the town. He looked around curiously, and the people passing by stared at him strangely, just like they did when his father first came visiting the town. Surprisingly, in the town square lay a huge statue of no one else but Dr. Jenkins, and next to it were several bodies hanging from nooses. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.